Ever had someone with a little power who thought they could make your life miserable? My on-site landlord tried that. She spent months tormenting me over every tiny thing. But when she finally tried to pull a fast one on my rent, I turned the tables so hard, she ended up being the one evicted. If you've ever had a nightmare neighbor, hit that subscribe button. Drop a comment where you're listening from. Like this video if you believe karma has perfect timing, because in this story, justice didn't just come knocking, it kicked the door right in. A few years back, I rented a townhouse from a kind old man named Mr. Bradford. He was one of those landlords you rarely find anymore. Polite, fair, and old school. No games, no hidden fees. Just straight honesty. I paid my $1,200 security deposit, signed the lease, and moved in, thinking I'd lucked out. But as I would soon learn, I hadn't met the real problem yet. See, Mr. Bradford didn't handle things personally. He had someone living on site, a woman named Camilla Hart, who called herself the property supervisor. That sounded professional, right? But the truth was, she was just another tenant. Her rent was discounted in exchange for handling a few things: collecting checks, scheduling repairs, and keeping an eye on the property. And guess what? She lived right next door to me. From the moment I met her, I could tell she didn't like me. I don't know if it was my age, my job, or just my face, but she made sure I knew I wasn't welcome. She had that control freak energy. The kind of person who thrives on authority, even if she barely has any. The first week I moved in, she left a note on my door that said, "Please make sure your porch light isn't disturbing other tenants." My porch light, a $10 bulb. It only got worse from there. If my friends parked in the wrong spot, even slightly, she'd come out with a tape measure to make sure they weren't encroaching on reserved space. If I played music past 9, she'd bang on the wall like I was throwing a rave. Once, she actually complained about my welcome mat. Said it looked unprofessional. I tried to shrug it off. I figured, whatever, I can deal with a nosy Karen for a year. But after a few weeks, her hostility became too consistent to ignore. Eventually, I found out why she was acting like that. Apparently, she'd wanted her friend, some guy with awful credit, to move into my unit. But when the applications went through, he failed the background check, and I passed. Mr. Bradford gave the lease to me instead. From that day forward, I wasn't just a tenant to Camilla. I was the guy who stole her friend's discounted apartment. It suddenly made sense why every tiny thing I did became an issue. Why she'd ignore me but laugh with the other tenants. Why she'd glare at my guests like they were trespassing. She wanted me gone. And honestly, if she had just left me alone, I would have quietly moved out at the end of the year and never looked back. But she decided to make things personal. About 10 months in, near the end of my lease, I noticed something strange. The laundry closet floor felt damp. When I looked closer, I saw the water heater leaking from the bottom. I could already smell that faint musty set, mildew starting to build up. I didn't want to risk a flood, so I did the responsible thing. I emailed Camilla, explained everything politely, and asked for a repair. No reply. A week passed. I followed up. Still nothing. Another week, third email. This time I mentioned that a friend of mine who's a plumber said it needed fixing ASAP. Her response? A one-line email. "I'll look into it." That was it. No scheduling, no follow-up, no repair. It was clear she was just stalling, trying to make sure the problem wouldn't get addressed until after I moved out. That way she could blame me for the damage and withhold my deposit. I could feel my patience starting to crack, but I stayed calm. I kept documenting everything, the emails, the dates, even photos of the leak getting worse. One afternoon, I saw her outside watering her plants. I decided to just ask in person when the plumber was coming. She gave me that smug smile, the kind that makes your stomach tighten, and said, "You better make sure this place passes inspection. I don't hand back deposits to messy tenants." That's when the light bulb went off. She thought she had control. That she could manipulate the inspection, deny my deposit, and make me pay for a water heater she ignored for weeks. Fine. If that's the game she wanted, I'd make sure she lost spectacularly. A week later, I got lucky. I saw Mr. Bradford himself in the parking lot, checking on one of the other units. I walked over, thanked him for being such a fair landlord, and casually mentioned that I'd be moving out soon. Then I asked if he'd be willing to do the final inspection himself, just so there wouldn't be any confusion. He agreed immediately. When inspection day came, I had everything spotless. I scrubbed that townhouse top to bottom until it looked like a listing photo. Mr. Bradford walked through the place, nodding, clearly impressed. He said, "You've really taken good care of this unit. I wish all my tenants were like this." Then we reached the laundry closet. I pulled away the towels I'd been using to soak up the leak. The floor was still damp, the wood starting to warp slightly. Mr. Bradford frowned. "Has this been like this long?" I didn't say a word. I just handed him printed copies of every email I'd sent to Camilla. 3 weeks of unanswered requests. He went quiet, reading them carefully. Then he shook his head and muttered, "That's unacceptable. I'm sorry you had to deal with that." He immediately said he'd return my full deposit, every single penny. Then I had an idea. My last month's rent, $1,300, was due the next week. I asked if we could just deduct my $1,200 deposit from the rent so I'd only owe $100. He thought for a second, nodded, and said, "That's fine with me." He even wrote it on the inspection form and signed it. Boom. Done deal. I handed him the $100 check, thanked him, and felt this quiet satisfaction settle in. I knew Camilla would absolutely lose her mind when she found out she wasn't part of the loop. A few days later, around 8 at night, there was an aggressive pounding on my front door. I opened it, and there she was, Camilla, red-faced and furious. She started yelling, "You didn't pay your full rent. You're in violation of the lease. I'll be starting eviction proceedings." I just smiled and said, "Actually, I did. Mr. Bradford approved deducting my deposit, so I only owed $100. He already signed off on it." Her face froze. It was like watching someone's brain crash mid-sentence. She stammered, "That's not how this works. I run inspections. You can't just—" I cut her off. "You can talk to Mr. Bradford. He approved everything. Have a great night." And I slowly closed the door on her as she stood there fuming on the porch. That moment, that quiet, controlled slam of the door, felt better than any shouting match ever could. A few days later, I came home from work and saw Mr. Bradford's truck outside again. He was fixing the water heater himself. I walked over to thank him, and we chatted while he worked. Then he said something that made me pause. He told me his daughter was moving into my unit after I left. Out of curiosity, I asked, "Oh yeah, so what about Camilla?" He sighed and said, "She's moving out too. Said she can't afford the full rent anymore." I almost laughed out loud. Turns out, without her discounted rate for being property supervisor, she was just another tenant. And Mr. Bradford, being the decent man he was, clearly didn't like how she'd handled things. I didn't ask what happened after. I didn't need to. I could already imagine her packing boxes, realizing her little empire of authority had crumbled. The woman who'd spent a year trying to control every inch of my life was now out of a home herself. Looking back, the most satisfying part wasn't even that she got evicted. It was that she finally had to experience what she'd put others through: rules, consequences, and a taste of humility. And honestly, the lesson I learned was simple. Sometimes revenge doesn't need fire or fury. Sometimes it's just about letting the truth surface in front of the right person, because when someone builds their power on lies, the moment light shines on it, the whole thing collapses. So what do you think? Did she get what she deserved, or would you have handled it differently? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. If you've ever had to deal with a power-hungry neighbor or a bad landlord, hit that like button. And if you love seeing justice served cold, make sure you're subscribed, because there are plenty more stories like this one on the way. Thanks for listening. And remember, sometimes karma just needs a little nudge.